Advisory Committee's March 28th meeting to discuss the new proposed solid waste contract for the city that the council will be discussing at its next monthly meeting on April 10th. This committee's goal is to hear about the different options presented by staff and make a recommendation to the full council. That being said, we're going to get started off with attendance. We have myself, I see Councilor McNamara. Councilor Mattson, as I just mentioned, is not here today. She's excused. Councilor Todd is here. Councilor McLaughlin is excused. Councilor Zandra Rice Hawkins will likely be excused, but she may still show up. And we also have Mr. Steinhauser with us today. We have 4 members of our 7-member committee present, so we do have a quorum. And on that, I'm looking for a motion for the minutes from our last meeting.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as they are.
Second.
Any corrections, additions, or edits that anyone wishes to suggest? Now hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of the minutes as presented? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, those are approved. We're going to now move over to item number 2, which is a continuation of our, I knew you'd be here, Zandra, welcome. We're going to move into, all we've done so far is taken attendance. We're going to accept the minutes from our last meeting. We will move into our discussion, and prior to getting to public testimony, I wanted to first ask staff if they had, thanked them, wonderful presentation last time we met. Is there any additional information you want to share? And then we'll turn it over to the committee members for questions. So on that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Chesley.
Sure, thank you very much. So one of the questions that was asked at the last time we convened was, looking back, how much has the community saved given the great contract that we executed about 8.5 years ago that locked in prices for a 10-year period? And so from the recycling side, we estimate the savings during the life of that contract will be in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. On the disposal side, we think the savings on the disposal side is about $1 million. So, you know, we've had the benefit of that for the, as I said, the past 8 years, and we still have 1.5 years to enjoy that. Looking forward, understanding that we'll be stepping into a new arena in the current solid waste economy by splitting the contracts in half and bidding them separately, and then put the best package together, so to speak. We think we saved in the neighborhood of about $1 million going forward by proceeding on that basis. So that was one of the questions I think that came up the last time we gathered, and we just took a little bit of time and came up with those estimates to share with you this evening. Happy to answer any questions on that.
No, I'm going to make a comment, though. Number one, thank you very much for the numbers. I know we did ask about those. Those are much higher than I thought they were going to be, which is wonderful news. And if my math is correct, a 1% tax increase is roughly $400 and I think $32,000 thereabouts.
I think it's in that neighborhood.
Somewhere in that general vicinity. So if we exclude the $1 million going forward that this current contract is still going to reap, and look at the $4.5 million, you can roughly equate that to about a 10%, not annual, but 10% savings on your tax bill over the last 8 years?
8 years, 8.5 years.
So great job. Thank you very much. Any of the committee members have questions for staff before we open it to public testimony?
There was a couple of things that were brought up last time that just to follow up on, and it's only been a week, so you might not have done any of this work. So just there was a comment made about the multi-level homes and storage of toters, and are we going to have like some kind of education or plan to help address that with residents?
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be part of the pilot program. I can speak to some personal experience with my family. I have a daughter who lives in a very congested section of Jamaica Plain. She's on the 3rd floor of her unit, and they bring their waste down on a regular basis to a toter that is stored alongside the unit on the driveway, and then someone within the unit is assigned responsibility every week to bring the toter to the curb line. So I think it's part of the educational process. The good news is I think a lot of people are already doing it, and we just have to catch up with them.
And then there was some discussion about pay bags with the automated system and how, again, it's only been a week, but we have to figure out how that's going to work. And, you know, the whole idea of the pay bags is a kind of a stamp on our trash, and regulating that, and then not having pay bags, our waste volumes might go up, and how are we going to kind of deal with that situation?
Yeah, so I would once again point to the pilot program. I think we spoke last time. What I anticipate the pilot program doing in that regard is allowing us the opportunity to look at compliance with the use of the pay-as-you-throw bags. So we'll roll out the pilot program to those households. We'll, you know, make it clear to the participants that they'll continue to use the pay-as-you-throw bags with the automated collection, and then we'll be able to audit and see what the compliance level is. Provided that it's 100% compliant, that would be a good thing. We'll have to adjust based on what we find if that's not the case, however.
If I could add to that too, one of the more important issues that this committee is going to have to discuss is, you know, as we move forward and approve a contract of some sort, the education component that's going to go into this as we deliver to the community, the key components of a pilot program, looking at whether or not the pay bags or the purple trash bags are going to work in this new containerized environment is going to be critical. We're going to have to look at that. There are going to be some revenue issues that we're going to have to address with that. And I think one of the key pieces that staff is going to have to address, and I'm sure we're going to have some say or influence, but council final approval, is ultimately how do we fund the new contract? Traditionally, pre-pay-as-you-throw, it was all put on the taxpayer in the form of property taxes. With the rollout of the pay-as-you-throw program 8 years ago, that shifted significantly to a user-based fee system with the purple trash bags. And as we consider going to an automated collection system with the containers, that financial dynamic, I don't know how it doesn't change in some shape or fashion. Adam, you just mentioned that in an ideal world, you can use the purple trash bags. Everybody is on the honor system. Everybody uses the purple trash bags. And in an ideal world, that works wonderfully. But what happens when if we experience during a pilot that, 10% of the residents aren't using purple trash bags? Well, that's going to impact revenue projections. So I think this is going to need to be a real robust discussion exactly around if it's going to work. Not just even if we try it, but will it work at all? And I guess building upon what you just said, I would look to staff to say, at least make the queries into other communities as to how they're doing it, what's worked and what hasn't. But, definitely something that we're going to have to discuss later. Councilor Rice Hawkins, did you have your hand up? Or just stretching? I apologize.
Sorry, I have a pinched nerve, so.
I'm
But
sorry
I actually do have a question.
We'll let Eric finish. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if you
No,
have
no,
more
that was great.
questions, please continue.
No, those were the main things that came out last time, and just making sure we don't forget them. Because they're going to be important to the program,
Absolutely.
to be a successful program.
Thank you for bringing those up. Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about this a little bit last week, but one of the questions I have gotten a lot over the course of the past week was whether we have other options for disposal of trash versus landfills or the incinerator. My understanding is that we don't, and that those are the options we have for vendors, but just because I've received that question several times, want to re-ask it here.
Those are the options that are available in the Northeast, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. I actually reread the report before coming here today, and I made note, I think it was, one of the three reports that we received that the recommendation by staff to use, and I always get this incorrect,
Wind waste.
Wind waste.
wind waste, is actually in line with the state's preferred method, which is the incineration component versus the landfill
That's correct.
component. But, yeah, I wish there were more options. I don't know what they would be, so if anybody has any ideas, please share them with us.
There's various technologies that I've heard of. I've not seen anything in the Northeast come about of those.
Any more questions before we open it to the public? No? Hearing none, thank you very much. I'm sure we may have questions for you when we finish the public hearing and start debating or discussing, and we'll let you know. That being said, is there anybody here from the public who wishes to share their thoughts about the contract or ask us any questions? You know, normally during this type of phase, we're not answering questions for the public, but would certainly love to hear what you have to say, and if it's appropriate, we can comment. Sir?
Go to the podium here.
Thank you. And if you could just give us the name, your name for the record as well.
Name is Ron Rayner, resident here since '89, retired environmental engineer. So I'm kind of getting in on this at the very tail end. I've had other civic interest and responsibilities, such as the Concord gas holder, preservation of that. So I'm kind of coming at this from the tail end of it. But congrats to General Services for doing a good job a decade ago with our contract. When I saw the articles in the Monitor about we're going to be shifting from burial to burning, by the way, to make light of something, it's always, trash is always B and B, and that's not a bed and breakfast. It's either, it's either bury, wait 30 years, and burn it, or burn it and bury it within a fairly short time frame. So, when I saw the articles in the paper, I saw the different numbers being considered. One of them being because society, we don't do well with single stream recycling. When this was brought up before council way back, I really wasn't an advocate, because working for industry for most of my career, we're lazy, period. You called it wish cycling in the general services and the educational film that you tried to do to inform us of upcoming changes. I just call it, just could care less, and I'm being polite. So in that regard, I didn't see anything in the Monitor articles about how we're going to go forward and continue recycling. The only thing I saw was we could be paying up to $100 a ton just for recycling. So, wow. So, a couple of things. Educational, you mentioned educating the public. Certainly agreed that film was meant to do just that, about you preparing us for a dramatic change in our approach and policy going forward. But I've been an advocate of why not, so here's a question and a suggestion, why not take a savvy reporter such as David Brooks, who I've done some work with from the Monitor, and take him with, say, Concord TV to the actual recycling facility that we have now in Allenstown through Casella, and do an actual film clip, 20, 30-minute film clip, and film all of the mistakes that we collectively make, such as throwing plastic or plastics in there that gum up the machinery. I think it would behoove us if we could actually film that and see the mistakes, put that out on a link on the General Services website, try to shorten it so we don't lose people, they get bored. But this is why we cannot go forward in this same manner, and then show the mistakes. That would be one thing I'd have. The other might be to suggested in the past to staff that why not do a pilot at the transfer station on Old Turnpike Road and have a couple of dumpsters there that are dedicated to one stream, glass only, cardboard only. Now, again, just as there has been abuse with single stream recycling, there certainly is the potential for abuse here, no doubt. Just like you're concerned today about people abusing the pay-as-you-throw with these with the automated collection. So the small towns around Concord, small towns, 5, 10, maybe 15,000 resident population, still with collection 2 days a week, and usually the resident drives themselves to the transfer station. They're successful at selling glass, paper, cardboard. Why can't we do that on a minimalistic approach? Try that at the transfer station on Old Turnpike Road and see if that would work. Now, we'd have to monitor it, so you'd have to devise the container such that it would be shaped with holes such that only glass would fit through it. And like for paper, way back, cardboard only slots rather than a wide open thing, so people would abuse it. But those are two thoughts that come to mind. So with that going forward, I hope to be a little more proactive and be more involved in this as we move forward.
Thank you for your testimony, and there will be many more opportunities, I think, as we kind of wrestle with how we as a community can deal with a new contract, that you'll have an opportunity. Any questions for Mr. Rayner before he leaves? No, thank you very much, sir, much
Okay.
appreciated. Those are very good ideas. The video idea is one that we've already discussed, and I always think back to 8 years ago with Adam in his Tyvek suit sorting trash over there at General Services, and I'd love to see that redone with Xander Rice Hawkins. Anybody else from
I'd get
the
in there with
audience who
you.
wishes to comment? Yes? I'll do it too, Xander.
Carol Foss, 26 Pennacook Street in Pennacook. I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, but can you explain again how recycling would be handled with the automatic collection?
Sure.
So where would it go?
Yep. So in short, what we're discussing today are 4 different proposals, and we'll make a recommendation.
Okay.
What's common to these proposals, for the most part, is not an abandonment of the recycling program, but and let's focus on the single homes or the single-family homes in the city. Each dwelling would have 2 bins, one for recycling and one for solid waste collection. So there is still the opportunity, and certainly what we plan to encourage residents to do, regardless of the option, continue to recycling. What we know for a fact, as of today, and traditionally in the past 8 years, is disposing of recyclables is either A, cheaper than getting rid of trash, or there was at one point in time an economic benefit as far as revenue. So residents will still be afforded the opportunity to recycle curbside.
Okay, so is the concept that the purple bag would go into the other receptacle?
That's one of the items that we've been discussing, yes.
Okay, one more question.
Sure.
Has there been any discussion about trying to do any sort of composting option for residences, which might be a 3rd receptacle?
The short answer is yes, there've been some discussion, certainly preceding the last 2 public hearings, and I think we're going to hear much more about that, possibly as early as this evening following the public hearing. And Councilor Rice Hawkins, not to steal anything from you, but you've been a very strong advocate of composting, food diversion, and there are many other things I think that we as a city can do, that we don't currently do, or things that we can do better than what we're currently doing. So,
Great,
Very good thoughts, and I think your thinking is the same place where ours is.
Super. Thank you much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, any questions for Mr. Butler? All right, you're all set. Thank you, miss. Anyone else wish to comment? Yes, please. Welcome.
Thank you. My name's Mary Till. I live on East Side Drive in Concord. And I'm a recent transplant from Derry. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit after hearing what Mr. Rayner had to say about how they do it in Derry. Many years ago, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, they built this whole transfer facility, and they don't have little holes. They have wide open spaces. And they have people sort paper, cardboard, glass, aluminum cans, tin cans, and then they have another section for trash. And they monitor that by having somebody, a couple people walk back and forth and kind of make sure people know what they're supposed to do. But it has been quite successful. I've been there and I look in the bins, and for the most part, they are what they're supposed to be. So I would urge you to perhaps maybe contact Derry's Public Works or go down there and see how it works. But I think single stream just invites abuse, and it's been quite successful down in Derry. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. For those who have lived in Concord for any length of time prior to our current solid waste contract, when we did recycling, it was done at different locations throughout the city. I remember there was one over at Memorial Field where there were 3 different bins where people did exactly what you're saying, sorting glass, colored glass, white glass, and then paper. So something that we'll definitely have to consider again.
Yeah, and they're not sorting glass per se in terms of color. It's all glass goes into one bin.
But thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Any questions?
I have one question. Does Derry have curbside pickup, or is it all residents bring their stuff to the transfer station?
Okay, no. Derry does not, as a town, provide curbside pickup, but there are private collectors, and so some people pay to have private collectors come by and pick up their stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, miss. Anyone else wish to speak? Excuse me. All right, last call before we close our public hearing and have a discussion. All right, thank you very much, everybody. You're certainly welcome to stick around. The 5 of us are going to discuss the contract options in front of us and devise this committee's recommendation. Like I said, you're welcome to sit, and if you want to leave, we certainly understand, so thank you. All right, so my thought is we have basically, see if I get this right, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 considerations before us today. Adam, did you have a question?
No, I just put them up on the board.
Okay. Flow control, disposal, and collection, thank you. Why don't we take them in that particular order? And again, the discussion here is focusing on which recommendations this committee wishes to suggest to the council. Why don't you review the flow control report for us, what it says, and what staff is looking for as far as a recommendation?
Basically, just a quick refresher, flow control was put on the books in Concord when we were one of the original sponsors of the waste-to-energy facility in Pennacook. And at that point in time, it was important to aggregate sufficient waste to make the plant viable. And the ordinance basically reads that all waste generated in the city of Concord goes to a designated facility. And that designated facility, of course, was at that point in time the Wheeler-Brader plant. Times have changed dramatically since we were there. Geez, was that well over 30 years ago. Now there is dwindling capacity in the state of New Hampshire, and having large volumes of solid waste to bring to the market is no longer an asset, it's actually a liability. So the purpose to take flow control off the books in Concord is to remove that requirement of all waste going to one designated spot. So we actually are reducing the volume of waste we're bringing to the market. And it's, if I think Jim Kennedy was here, he would opine as to some issues with the legal standing of the flow control ordinance. And I think just from a practical standpoint, as I just articulated, there's issues. So for that reason, it's highly recommended by General Services to revise the city's solid waste ordinance and remove the flow control element from it as introduced at the last city council meeting to be considered at the next city council meeting in April.
And this will allow a potential contractor to, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say here as far as summary. By removing the flow control ordinance, we're allowing
Commercial waste to go where it wants
wherever
to
the
go.
market bears.
Right.
Yeah, and we're looking to make it that ordinance change effective at the end of the current contract, so that will provide haulers an opportunity to adjust as they see fit.
Yeah, that's a
In
good
advance.
point. So,
Any questions from the committee? Comments? So my general comment is this seems to be pretty straightforward. It seems to be a precursor to any contract as we go forward to allow some flexibility. So is there any objection to this committee making a recommendation as requested that we eliminate the flow control requirement?
You looking for a motion? I'd make the motion to recommend that. Is that
Tell
how we're
you
going to
what,
do this?
Why don't we do all the, I don't think it's necessary, but yeah, let's go with the motion. So we have a motion by
Sure.
Councilor Todd. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So there we go. Item number one taken care of.
so before we jump to item 2,
Yep.
administratively,
Thank
we'll
you.
draft a report for the chair to submit to city council to that effect.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you. Up next on disposal. Walk us through the objective here, and then we'll make a, so, I'm sorry, by summary, my understanding is we are looking to designate, I can't say,
Wind waste.
wind waste as the disposal location, in part because of its proximity, its cost effectiveness, as well as it's the preferred disposal method, which is incineration.
Right, that's correct. And by way of background, by state law, city council needs to go through the procedure to designate that at a city council meeting. That, again, was outlined in the report that we had submitted to city council last March, and we're recommending that city council make that designation for a 10-year term, starting in July 1st of 2024.
And what I would add to this is it's not always in life where the right thing and the financially best thing line up, but it's nice when those things do occur, so. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for staff?
Just a quick question. So does this is, as written, recommends approving with the resolution. So is the resolution a contract that we're recommending?
The resolution designates the wind waste site as a location to dispose of solid waste for a 10-year term. It's not the entire contract, it's just the, I'm going to say, the outcome of the contract.
So I guess for clarification purposes, what the council will actually be acting on is a formal resolution, written all the appropriate legalese, dedicating or identifying that's this disposal location. The discussion topic in the report, which precedes or is accompanying that resolution, reads as follow, and I'll just read this for the audience. Discussion, given the city's intention for disposal and collections contracts to be awarded to the combination of proposals that result in the lowest cost and is in the best interest of the city, the most attractive disposal option is the wind waste proposal with either a 5, 7, or 10-year term. Accordingly, we, staff, recommend that the City Council authorize the selection of Wheelabrator Concord Company LP, Wind Waste Innovations, as the city's solid waste disposal facility for a 10-year term. In addition to the financial benefits of using wind waste as the city's primary disposal site, the practice of waste disposal through incineration at a waste-to-energy facility is aligned with the state's ordered preference for solid waste management. So this is the report which accompanies the resolution, which would be much more formal and legalese. So that's what we're recommending tonight, is the adoption of the appropriate resolution to designate wind waste as the disposal site. Councilor Todd?
If I could just make a comment, I think I'm going to be in favor of this. As you have already pointed out, the alignment of best practices in this case does match with the lowest cost option, and I think that that is good. That was not the case before, and that in fact was one of the reasons that we are not still incinerating our trash in Concord. I want to just point out that there, over the years, have been some residents who have expressed concern about incineration, that it is also not a perfectly environmentally friendly process, but it is much more controlled than most landfills are. So landfills, in terms of the emissions into the air, my understanding at least is that there's very little way to control that in a reasonable way. I think some facilities do try to do that, but overall there isn't. With facilities such as wind waste, although there are emissions that are put into the air, those are controlled. They're not controlled by us. They're not controlled by wind waste. They're controlled by federal government regulations. And so I always recommend to residents that if in fact they are concerned about that, when you see the big plumes of smoke and you don't know what's in them, for coming from the facility, that the way to get involved in that is to contact your federal government representatives and get more information about it. I think that I've actually gone on a tour of wind waste. This was several years ago, but it is a very efficient organization, I think, from what I could see. And I think ultimately what we'll want to do, as has already been referenced by a few folks, I know we've got written testimony, and then we also heard here tonight, that we want to try to reduce the amount of waste that we put into the incinerator. So I think that's an important thing to look into. About a third of waste, generally speaking, is food waste. So I think anything that we can do to reduce the amount, we're going to reduce the tonnage, we're going to reduce the cost to the taxpayers. And I think that, again, as Mr. Rayner pointed out in his testimony, that education is going to remain a key component of this going forward, and rolling out programs that will encourage residents to be able to have that option, I think, will be important. And additionally, textiles is another one. I think anywhere from 10 to 15% of waste is clothing items, and I know that Manchester has just recently utilized a program where they are have an organization that comes and will actually pick up those materials from your home and then be able to recycle them instead of having them go into the waste stream. So I think we have lots of really good options going forward, and again, I think that environmentally, I'm in favor of this going with wind waste over the landfill, most certainly. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So that being said, I guess we'll look for a motion relative to this committee's recommendation to the council relative to disposal.
I'll move in favor.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I have to abstain.
Very good, so let the record reflect that Mr. Steinhauser recuses himself from this particular piece. Thank you, I need to ask about that. All right, now it brings us to probably the most substantive part of our discussion this evening, which is the collection contracts. Last month, we did hear a presentation from staff, and there are, in the interest of keeping this short for those who are present and listening, there were 4 options that were presented or are being presented. By summary, the first one is the city keep manual collection. I believe that's what it was, for a 5-year term. And then at the end of that 5-year term, we would have no choice but to renegotiate another contract, and all indices, all indications that there's nobody who's going to do manual collection the way we understand it today going forward. Option 2 is to go with, let me see if I get this right, manual collection. We would immediately go to automated collection
Correct.
on day 1.
Got it up on the screen there.
Do this from memory.
Yeah, make it a little easier.
Oh, thank you very much. Now you get to hear me read. Option 1, immediate transition on July 1, 2024, as proposed by Casella, as an alternative to the 5-year term. Or option 2, a sudden transition on July 1, 2029, at the end of the 5-year manual collection term, as proposed by Casella. This is to automated collection. Option 3 is an orderly transition by July 1, 2027, after a 2-year pilot that starts by July 1, 2025, as proposed, in a 7-year term. Or the 4th option is an orderly transition by July 2028, after a 2-year pilot that starts by July 1, 2026, and that's accompanied by a 10-year contract. So what is the group, where do you want to begin? Councilor McNamara.
I'd like to look at the one that's gonna give us the most time to do it right. I'm not so much in favor of the first two because of the sudden and immediate. I think there's a lot more, we've had discussions, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be discussed and needs to be fine-tuned and figured out. So I'm in favor of the last two because it gives us time to hear from the community, educate, and really try to find resources that are gonna make it, get it right. That's my thought.
Anyone else have thoughts they wish to share?
Is there a price differential between the 4?
There are, yep, so that's laid out in the council report, the price differences. There are price differences as well between the 7 and 10-year contracts, which includes the pilot that you're speaking about. And that has to do with the, when the capital comes into their pricing. So those pilot programs and the purchase of the whole fleet of automated collection vehicles comes at a different time. So you'll see different pricing for years 1 through 7 in both of those different pricing proposals. From my perspective, that does a couple things. Looking at the 10-year option does a couple things. You get the pilot. First you delay the transition to automated collection as long as we can while avoiding that sudden transition, and it allows us to do that pilot. But the other piece that I think is important is if you look at the alternative proposals from the other proposer, the pricing associated with this, with the Casella proposal is less than the other proposal.
Substantially less.
Significantly less. So it allows you to kind of lock in a contract that we see as favorable for the city for a longer period of time with the 10-year option.
And that was one of the driving reasons when the three of us were at a table similar to the table you folks are at. We saw value that by what we learned from the past. We had a great contract, and we saved $3.5 and $1 million over a 10-year contract. And certainly, solid waste costs are skyrocketing. And the longer you can buy now, I think the better. And when you look at the options 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's more important to look at the last two options versus the other option from another vendor who may be higher, because that is the marketplace. We can't lose sight that we only had 2 vendors respond to Concord, and we are somewhat geographically challenged. We're at the edge of the urban area, so but I think we need to be cognizant of that.
So I guess, does the 10-year contract give a better bang for the buck, for the city's buck, than the 7-year contract?
I would say that it does.
Okay.
particularly when you look at the other proposals that came in. If you
So it's
consider
interesting.
that's the market,
I think really what we're talking about is a value-based decision. You know, clearly, the 10-year contract has additional costs built into it relative to when the capital comes into play, the capital expense of the provider. What kind of strikes me, and I'm looking for others to comment about this, is our experience tells us the trash collection and disposal markets, and certainly the recyclable markets, are volatile and they're increasing. Is there anything to indicate that, is there anything that we can see that those in the know are talking about that suggests, hey, a shorter contract is better, that something's going to change the financial levers going forward, that a shorter contract is more beneficial? Or as you're suggesting, it almost sounds as though we're prepaying for predictability in some ways, that we don't know what's going to happen in years 8, 9, and 10 of a contract, but this is a way of locking in some certainty as to what our expenses are going to be.
I think it's well said. I think we are locking into current prices, because I think as you look downstream, the ability to manage solid waste in the Northeast is going to become more and more expensive in the future. There's no one saying it's going to become easier.
Not unless we see more landfills and more incinerators and,
Right. So, given that costs are going to be rapidly increasing into the future, I think it makes sense. We have the opportunity now to buy 10 years worth of disposal and recycling. I think it makes sense to do that, and I think, we were well served 8 years ago when we made that 10-year decision. There's no guarantee in 10 years hence we can look back and say we're going to save $3.5 million and $1 million again. But I think when we get to that point, we will be able to look back and say we have saved money by going to a long-term contract.
I would imagine the contractors, in this case Casella, are very aware that we saved some money over the last few years, and their 10-year rates probably reflect the fact that there's some uncertainty too. So what I'm really hearing is we need to build an incinerator in Concord and start charging people to get rid of trash. That was a joke. You don't need to respond to that. Councilor Rice Hawkins.
I'll just add, I mean, kind of the conversation is a little bit where I'm at with this as well. And on Casella itself, the fact that they were the only one who offered all the services that we were looking for, and I haven't heard any desire by constituents to move back from leaf collection or other things like that. So, and the 10-year contract makes sense to me for that certainty as well.
I don't disagree. I actually spent quite a bit of time looking at the numbers, trying to justify a 7-year contract over a 10-year contract, because 10 years obviously is longer than 7, and what does that mean for the long term of the city? And there's an expression of being penny wise and pound foolish, that while we're only committing to a 7-year contract at a lower cost, what does it do at the end of 7 years when we have to rebid for those next 3 years? Logic certainly suggests it's going to be much more expensive contracting 6-7 years from now than it is right. As Mr. Chesley said, at today's rates, or certainly rates in the modeling algorithms.
And I also think, and this goes back to the question about, are there other ways we can dispose of waste too? Even with the separation between the collection and disposal, if those technologies are not being implemented in our region right now, we're probably 10 years out, right, from anything where we would have a chance to have anything like that and to see how it goes. So having longer contracts from that perspective as well. I don't think there's other relevant options that are going to present
That's a good point. I
themselves.
hadn't even thought of that if something was to be presented today, it's going to take that long to create the infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I'm along the same line of thinking. As Councilor McNamara said, initially that I think it behooves us to take an option that is going to give us the longest, excuse me, the longest possible transition time to automated collection. And for those who missed the last meeting, we did have a detailed discussion about that the industry is basically changing, and we're not going to be seeing manual collectors anymore working for these organizations who will be collecting trash. So we need to be prepared for that, and I think this gives us the best option to prepare for that. I also think it's I feel compelled to say that the 3 R's of waste disposal are reuse, reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I think we've been doing it the other way around, and it doesn't really work. And so part of the education, I think, is going to be, as we've already discussed and touched on, the reducing part and the ways that we can get folks to learn that while they're doing that, and it may be a little bit of an effort, that in time it will become a habit like anything else, and you'll be saving money.
Absolutely.
In addition to the environmental savings that we
I think
will
that's
be
one
able
of
to
the biggest
create. So-
challenges we're gonna have is, as we talk about options for reducing or reusing, it's how do we, I can't say compel, how do we incentivize or how do we encourage people to seek out those cost savings if we're not using purple trash bags as a lever to control costs? And I don't have the answers. I mean, we had some individuals tonight testify about, I apologize, certainly doing a video. We've talked about food diversion, textile diversion. You brought up Council Todd, which I think is excellent. There's all kinds of things. Someone had mentioned, I think it was in Derry, there's a private collector who comes and helps out with curbside recycling, that sort of thing. We may end up seeing that as we discuss food diversion or textile diversion, we may ultimately create a market for someone to come in and provide services that are not covered in this particular contract. The other thing I like about the 10-year contract is it gives us that much more time to figure out ways to make it all work.
I could just add too, because you brought it up, and Mr. Rayner provided in his testimony the concept of Casella's, a video of Casella's facility. I believe that they actually already have created a video. So we should go and take a look at that. You guys have probably already seen it, but I think I did, but it was maybe a long time ago. And see if it's still appropriate and it would meet the needs that, as was provided in the testimony tonight, that it would kind of be a helpful aid, in other words, to show people what happens to these materials when you dispose of them in recycling, and hopefully it would maybe be able to provide some kind of tips. Otherwise, it's over to Councilor Rice Hawkins, right, for the new video, part 2, as you said, and Councilor McNamara also, I understand. We all should probably participate in something like that,
Yeah,
but
we
I think
probably
that we may still want to do our own thing, but I think there is a video that's out
I
there.
think the city manager and mayor would be great.
Now we're talking.
Second.
If I can make one other comment?
Please.
Over our current contract, the waste industry has changed a lot. China sword stuff, volatility in all the commodity markets. The longer-term contract that the city has, the easier it is to mitigate those storms. Allows you to plan more for the future. So whether it's organics management or textiles management, all these things take time. Whoever's going to do it needs to make money doing it, so we need to have a plan so that they can be successful. Otherwise, we just do things and it's just, a sign on the wall that nobody reads anymore. So I think we need, as a city and as a community, to really plan how we want to handle these materials. And just to kind of clarify, so there's this inverted pyramid is the solid waste. It's in the state solid waste plan, right? So reduce, reuse, recycle, those are the big things, which are the biggest boxes and probably the smallest amount of material gets managed there. And then there's fewer incinerators than landfills. So it's an inverted pyramid, but it really goes the other way in terms of how much material is being managed. Incineration with energy production, which is the wind waste, is higher than just incinerating. So there's several steps. We're always going to need landfills because stuff falls through, right? There's stuff that can't be reduced, reused, recycled, or incinerated, or with stuff that gets incinerated needs to go somewhere. There's always a need for landfills. We're never gonna get rid of that. But the landfill space in New England is dwindling every second. And in 10 years, our state doesn't have very much capacity. Certain regions do because they're limited service areas, so they're fine 10 years out, but communities like ours are not. So there needs to be, our work's not done when this contract's signed. Our work continues because there needs to be stuff done looking out in the future, so.
I think you're right. I think the committee's work just begins. Certainly, the state has a big nut in front of it to figure out how they're gonna look at waste disposal in the nation. So, I actually like the predictability of the 10-year contract. Since I've been on the council, it's always valued, long-term financial planning. Predictability in budgets is what makes for successful budgets where, we work on a balanced budget principle. Without the pandemic, where we actually used some city savings to actually soften what could have been some very costly tax increases, would still be doing that. And, while I'm here, I'll report that I believe in this upcoming budget proposal, we're gonna hear that we're back on a balanced budget, 2 years ahead of what we thought we were gonna be able to do because of some hard work that the financial planners in the city have done. So it's all good stuff. It just speaks again to the predictability and financial modeling is critical. So. Anybody else have any questions or comments for staff?
I just one question to clarify. So whatever motion's being made, is that there is no other option than Casella as is this, or is it just, like, what's the?
I'll let staff answer the question. There was one other proposal, I understand, right? For collection.
There's two proposals. Casella was the only proposer who offered all services to the city.
Right, so that's your recommendation, is to go with that one?
And given that they provided us a 7-year term and a 10-year term, and of those two terms, our recommendation, for the reasons you folks just articulated, was to go to a 10-year term contract with Casella.
Okay.
Does
And
that
that
answer your
contract's
question,
been
Eric?
conditionally awarded based on city council making the determination on the term.
Of the term.
Okay. I just have to understand how I vote, that's all.
Do you need to recuse yourself
Yep.
at all from this one?
Yep.
Okay. Hearing no other discussion, I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion, which would be to recommend staff's recommendation, which is be helpful if you left it up there for me, actually. I was really counting on reading some of that. And now
You see what Jeff and I have to do on a daily basis?
was clear.
No, it's the other slide, actually. It's the last one that you had up with the 4 recommendations.
One
'cause
that I
need to-
cheated off, yeah.
That's, yeah, there we go. That's the one that helps me. So which would be, staff's recommendation was, and this would be my motion, for an orderly transition by July 1, 2028, after a 2-year pilot that starts by July 1, 2026, as proposed by Casella's 10-year term. That's my
second.
motion.
I'm going to add one thing, which is not part of the motion, but just for staff to kind of keep in mind, and certainly when the council takes this up, we as a committee know we have a lot of work to do in addressing all the concerns we've heard, the concerns that we discussed prior to getting to this point, which is, again, textile diversion, organic diversion, recyclables, incentivizing the community, providing options. I think that's going to be probably some of the most important work the city does over the next couple years in preparing that rollout. So I will not be here at the April meeting. I am going to be away. So certainly I look to the 3 of you to kind of carry that message forward. So on that, all in favor of the motion for the orderly transition to 10-year contract, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Hearing none, certainly write your report, and you have our ringing endorsements.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's On the agenda for today, item 4 is adjournment. I just wanted to, while staff is still sitting here, let's talk about some of those things that we know we're gonna have to take up going forward. We just mentioned 4 or 5 of them. All I would ask is in the report that you ultimately prepare for the council meeting in April, certainly include those things that we've discussed, so that this committee has almost, if not clear direction, clear endorsement from the full council that this is the direction we want to go, investigating these options. At that point in time, we can discuss scheduling. We'll get the contract approved, give us a little bit of time, look at the modeling, and then start tackling all these big issues going forward. So, Councilor Rice Hawkins.
If I may, I might actually recommend that we set the date for that next SWAC meeting to have the conversation of some of those options that exist locally, so that when this discussion comes up at city council, we can add
Sure.
the date and time.
That's a good idea.
I would say the following. We know we're currently in, our next meeting is April. We'll vote on a contract in April, one way or the other, there's gonna be a vote in April. Immediately coming out of April, we are into budget season where we're meeting 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
I don't have the capacity to meet on solid waste in the month of May. I would suggest, now it puts us into, and I believe the current, the current budget schedule is going to be in your agenda packet, comes out, tomorrow, I believe. Proposes budget adoption, I want to say near the end of May. I apologize if I have that wrong.
I don't think we're gonna get it till next Thursday.
You're right, next week we
It's,
get it for
it's
the
it's
following
one more
week.
week, but yeah.
I think the earliest we could possibly meet is June, more likely July, to actually begin some robust discussions. Let's currently pick a date in July, and if we need to adjust that, we certainly can. July, I know, is a difficult month for some people because of vacations. But let's at least put it out there as a placeholder so people can start thinking about it. Is there a date that works for staff? This committee, by the way, typically meets in the afternoons at 4:30 at the General Services Department, usually on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday is typically what we go with. So looking ahead to July, are there any particular dates that don't work?
I would just note that that first week is the week of July 4th, so you probably want to at least go to the second week.
Staff, committee members have any thoughts?
I'm sorry, what weeks are those?
It's the week of the,
We're looking at the
14.
second, third, or fourth weeks of July at this point.
Okay.
I'd be fine with those couple of days right after the city council meeting.
I'm free the
Assuming most
second
of us
week
will
in
be here.
July.
You said you're free the second?
Second week in July, I'm
Yeah.
free.
That would be after the council meeting, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's put out there for discussion, I'll make up a day, the Thursday after the council meeting, which I'm guessing is.
13th.
13th.
And we can always adjust that as appropriate once we talk to Councilor Mattson, who else are we missing? Councilor McLaughlin. If it doesn't work, we can reschedule. We can also at that time gauge based upon public hearing at the April meeting. If a lot of people show up and express interest in participating in those discussions, we can have the meeting here. So, thank you for the recommendation. Any other business that anybody wants to bring up before we adjourn? No. Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So
Make
moved.
the motion,
Um,
or second it.
We have a 4 and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
thank you.
Sincerely appreciate staff's hard work through all of this, and more to follow. Thank you.
Thank you.